All right, so this is where we were on our last session. So, and I promised that we're going to start off by doing the calculations there. So it would be nice if you have a piece of paper or somewhere where you can even write some notes and follow through on the calculations, because you will have to apply this on the questions that you have on the assignment there. All right, so the ratio there is 6:4 and 1:2 on that one. So it's 600, 400, and then 100 and 200 in those countries. And then the products or the commodities that we're dealing with is blankets and shoes. So if Lesotho exchanges 600 tons of blankets for 600 tons of shoes, so Lesotho is getting shoes, right? And then they're giving off blankets, right? So obviously here, just to give an analysis, if you look at Lesotho, Lesotho is doing 600 while South Africa is doing 100 for blankets. And then for shoes, Lesotho is doing 400 and then South Africa is doing 200. So you can already see from this year that Lesotho has an absolute advantage in the production of both commodities. So under the theory of Adam Smith, which is theory of, excuse me, under the theory of Adam Smith, trade is not possible, right? Which is the theory of absolute advantage, right? Trade is not possible because Lesotho is not going to gain anything since it's more efficient in the production of both commodities than South Africa. So trade is not possible. So trade only becomes possible under the theory of comparative advantage, right? So where you need to do your calculations. So here I'm just going to simplify the calculations and state them. But remember, when you write it down, it needs to be clear, and then you need to do it per country and per commodity, right? But if you look at this here, if you just base on this, if you say get the price of shoes, let's start off with the price. Okay, let's start off with the price of blankets. Okay, since it's what we have on the top, the price of producing a blanket in Lesotho. So you are basically gonna be dividing. Okay, I think, excuse me, there the other one just got kicked out. But I'm just gonna give you a very quick way of understanding this. A very quick way of understanding this, because I know sometimes in an exam situation, you get so much pressure that you don't really seem to see what's going on there. All right, let's just give this machine a second. I think it's loading. The network is so bad now because of load shedding. I wasn't around, and now I come back. I hear load shedding has gotten worse. All right, so we want the price of blankets, right, in terms of shoes in Lesotho and in South Africa. So you're basically wanting a ratio where your blankets are going to give you 1. And then you want to know it's 1 is to what? Right? You want to know it's 1 is to what in terms of blankets and shoes in Lesotho, and then 1 is to what in terms of blankets and shoes in South Africa. So you are basically, to have a 1 there on the blankets, you divide by 600. So you divide that by 600, you're going to get your 1. You divide the other one by 600 there again. Then that's going to be 0 point something. So it already gives you an idea that the relative price, or the opportunity cost, right? The opportunity cost of producing 1 blanket in Lesotho is going to be 0 point something. While if you do the same in South Africa, it's going to be 1 is to 2 there. So which means it's more expensive in South Africa to produce a blanket since it gives you a 2, while in Lesotho it gives you a 0 point something. So which means Lesotho must then have a comparative advantage in the production of blankets, right? So if Lesotho has a comparative advantage in the production of blankets, then it should mean that South Africa has a comparative advantage in the production of shoes. They always oppose each other, right? So that's one way you can do that. But going to our calculations now, how many tons of shoes does Lesotho gain? Right? How many tons of shoes does Lesotho gain? So first of all, Lesotho is giving off 600 blankets and getting how many shoes? 600 tons of shoes, right? So for 600 blankets, Lesotho could have otherwise exchanged it for 400 shoes within the country, but instead they are getting 600 shoes. So which means the gain is going to be 600 minus 400 there. And that's going to be the gain for that. It's very simple. So when you are dealing with these questions, always watch out. You want to always watch out for they are saying how many tons of shoes does Lesotho gain. So sometimes they could say how much does Lesotho gain in terms of blankets. You see, they could put it that way. You see, so you need to watch out the commodity that is being focused on. And then how many hours does Lesotho save? Then in terms of hours now, look at what they gained on A. So they gained 200 shoes on A. And how many hours does it take to manufacture 200 shoes? Then you come and check there. So in Lesotho, you do 400 shoes per hour. So 200 should be half an hour. So which means they are gaining 30 minutes. But you want to show the working, right? You obviously want to show the working. It's going to be 200 divided by 400 times an hour. So that should give you half an hour. And then how many shoes does South Africa gain? Right. Then we go back to see now how many shoes South Africa gains. So we have a ratio here that we are dealing with, right? We have a ratio here that we are dealing with. So let me just put it up for you on Excel.
I'm so sorry. Can I please stop you?
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to go back to the hours one. So you're saying with regards to shoes, like per hour they produce 400, which means 200 will be half an hour.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Please explain the last part after what you said.
About the workings, right?
Yes, please.
All right. So sorry about that. Okay. So the last part I was saying, okay, this is how you will have to show the working. So first of all, you need to establish how many tons of shoes are being gained. So we already said it's 200 tons
It's 200.
shoes.
Yeah.
So now we want to find out how much hours is those 200 tons. So let me just put it up on Excel quickly.
Also, the hours that we are looking for are based on what they've gained.
What they have gained, yes.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
it means that's what they are saving. So that's
Okay.
basically going to be 200 divided by 400 times 1 hour. So that's going to be 0.5. That should just about be 30 minutes. So you can, funny enough, most of these countries are always saving 30 minutes. So they try and simplify it for us.
Okay.
But if it's not
Okay.
going to be,
Thank you.
yeah, but if it's not going to be straightforward amounts, suppose here it was 500. Suppose we had a 500 there. So it basically means the gain is going to be 100. Right? Then you basically take your 100 divided by 400, you multiply it by an hour. So that would give you a quarter of an hour, which is what? What's a quarter of an hour? 15 minutes, right? That's what you will be saving. So how are you saving? So it's because basically you could have been manufacturing what you gained, right? You could have been manufacturing it locally, but you decided not to manufacture it locally and get it from elsewhere. So you are saving time in so doing. So this is all about international trade, where we are saying you always want to specialize on what you are good at, because at the end of the day, we assume that you save time, right? You are better off. Right? And then how many shoes does South Africa gain, right? So let me just put that here on the side. But I'm just going to write those amounts. We have 600 and then 400, and then we have 100, and then we have 200. All right. Let me share it on that side. So this is just the information that we have there without this minus 0.5. Right. So this is the country that we're dealing with here, South Africa. So at the end of the day, South Africa is giving off, okay, so we are starting off with blankets and then shoes. All right. Blankets and then shoes. So at the end of the day, we want to equalize these and have a 600 and 600. All right. So let me put this one here in red. Or I'm gonna put the next one here in red. So to make this into 600, you can multiply that by 6 basically. Why 600? Because that's what we are exchanging. We are basically exchanging 600 for 600. So we want to know the relative autarky prices of those things there. If you multiply your 200 by 600, that should give you 1.2 there. So let me put that in red because this is what we did the calculation for. All right, so according to the question now, so we have the autarky prices of 600. Lesotho is exchanging 600. Right, Lesotho is exchanging 600 tons for tons of blankets for 600 tons of shoes. Right. So which means at the end of the day, Lesotho is going to get 600 tons of shoes, while South Africa is going to get what? 600 tons of blankets. Right. So let's put it in this way. So what's coming in now to South Africa is 600 tons. This is South Africa. So these two here represent SA. And then we said these are blankets, and then these ones are shoes. Let me put it like this, shoes, just to shorten it. All right, so Lesotho, right? Lesotho is sending 600 blankets to South Africa, right? So which means at the end of the day, South Africa is getting 600 blankets. So there we go, we have that 600. But how much is that 600 blankets worth in terms of shoes? It's worth 1,200 shoes, right? So it's basically worth 1,200 shoes. So what's the gain now? What's going to be the gain? So basically it would have cost them 1,200 shoes to get 600 blankets, right? That's what it means there from the autarky price. But instead, they are getting 600 blankets for giving off 600 shoes. Does that make sense to anyone? So that should basically tell us that 1,200, which is what should have cost them, against what it actually cost them, 600, basically gives you another 600 there. Let me take you back to the question. So what you basically do when you get a question like this, then it gets slightly complicated now, where you need to find out, like in this instance, how many shoes does South Africa gain? But we know that South Africa is giving away, what is South Africa giving away? It's giving away tons of shoes, right? But then what is it getting? It's getting blankets, right? So South Africa is giving away 600 shoes, right? And then gaining 600 blankets. So what they are gaining, so what they gain basically is what they received minus what they lost. So they lost 600 shoes, right? But then what did they gain? They then gained what? 600 blankets. So how much are those blankets worth in terms of shoes? So they basically got 1,200, right? Because it's basically gonna be 600 there that they got. So they basically got 1,200. But what did they lose? They lost 600, right? Which is what they gave to Lesotho. So that should then give you a gain of 600. Very simple there. So which means how many shoes does South Africa gain? South Africa is basically gaining 600 shoes. So which means what you could do now on that is to using that information, you can also get to find out how much they are saving. You can basically find out how much they are saving. So if they're gaining 600 shoes, and then according to this now, according to the new, or basically, if you check this out here, per hour, they can do 200. Right? So 600 would basically be 3 hours, right? So that's what they're going to be saving in terms of hours from what they are getting from Lesotho. That's the total save. All right, and then for for part D, what is the range of mutually beneficial trade? Explain how you arrived at your answer. So on this one again, you pick it up. So all these questions are related. You pick it up from there. So you look at the last amount there, which is 400. Then you type it 400, and so basically 400 is our minimum there, right? For what? For the price of blankets. That's for the price of one blanket. And then again, the price should not go beyond this one here. Right? Basically should not go beyond, sorry, for the price of 600 blankets there, it should not go beyond 1.2, 1,200. That's basically it. So this again is the same where we started off, where you need to equalize these two amounts because you're basically talking of blankets there. So you want to equalize those amounts. All right. I don't know if you have any questions there.
Yes. So when they want us to explain like how we got to the range, then how do we go about that? Do we show the calculations or how would we go about that?
All right. Okay. Let me explain how you're gonna put that one. All right. So in terms of the explanation now, you can basically state that the price of 600 blankets in Lesotho is 400 shoes. So the price of blankets should not go below the price of 400, or should not go below 400 shoes, right? And then the price of 600 shoes in SA is 1.2. So the price again should not go above 1.2. So which means,
Okay.
then if you want to further explain that, you can then state that if the price is above 1.2, SA is better off manufacturing it. Or basically, so I mean, SA is better off manufacturing the shoes themselves, right? And not trading, or they are better off without trade because it's basically going to be expensive. So remember, SA can do this at 1.2. So if you offer them a price that is higher than 1.2, they are losing, right? It's going to be too expensive for them because locally they can basically do 1.2. And then with Lesotho, if you offer them 400, they might as well not trade because they're not gaining. They will instead sell it locally. You see, that's the explanation there.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, and then back again on the standard theory of trade, right? Just to talk about where we had left off again last time. So these notes are available, by the way. I think I'll have to, okay, no, I'm not gonna have to resend them. I think I'm gonna have to send them to Debo because she joined just now. But I'm just gonna send after the class. All right, so here what we're looking at, so in terms of these graphs that you see here, in terms of the textbook, there's always going to be nation 1 and nation 2, right? And in most cases, nation 1 is going to be labor abundant, and then nation 2 is going to be capital abundant. So the assumption usually is that X is labor-intensive commodity, while Y is a capital-intensive commodity. So we went through the definitions of that, and I think the definitions are there on the notes there. Then we're also saying the shape of these PPFs basically tell you about a country's comparative advantage, right? It gives you information about a country's comparative advantage. For instance, we said if there's more on the X here, it basically shows us that it's a lot easier for nation one to produce X, commodity X, so which is a labor intensive commodity, because nation one is labor abundant, right? So if we're saying it's labor abundant, it's either there are two sources of labor abundance. It's either there's a lot of labor in sheer numbers, or there's labor is basically cheaper in that country. So if you think of countries like China, China has a huge population, right? China has a huge population, and Nigeria also has a very huge population, right? So that's why labor is very cheap in that country. So China is then expected to be labor abundant, right? Because labor is cheap. But not only is it cheap, it's also a lot of it, right? In terms of numbers, there's just a lot of it. And you know that once there's a lot of it, it just gets cheap, right? Think of it this way: unskilled workforce. Unskilled workforce is cheap, right? Why? Because there's just a lot of it in the world. There's just a lot of it in the world. Hence, it's cheap. So once a country has a lot of unskilled workforce, then it can therefore succeed in the production of those commodities that require unskilled workforce. Think of capital, then you want to talk of the manufacturing of, say, machinery, stuff like laptops, stuff like, some of these automobiles, right? Something that requires quite a lot of capital, so which is machinery in its production. So these are countries like Japan, by the way. So they are very much capital intensive, right? So the capital abundant. So hence they'll be manufacturing these capital intensive commodities. So with this here, you can basically predict the pattern of trade, right? So you want to manufacture what you are good at, and then trade it for what you are not so good at. So that's a lot similar again to the theory of comparative advantage, building on from what Smith started off. And then we spoke of these community indifference curves, right? Community indifference curve. So we need to define what an indifference curve is in the first place. So it shows the various combination of two commodities that yield equal satisfaction to the community or the nation. So here we are talking of satisfaction in consumption, right? So whenever we talk of indifference curve, think of consumption, and when you talk of consumption, think of demand, right? So this is basically what we are demanding, right? Or what we basically want to have, what can satisfy a country or can satisfy a commodity, or sorry, a country or a community. And then there's the issue of the marginal rate of substitution. So which is the amount of, which is defined as the amount of one good that a nation could give up for an extra unit of another good, excuse me, in consumption, right? So we are dealing again with consumption. And then one of the characteristics there, so as you move along the same indifference curve, satisfaction is the same. So if you're on one indifference curve, satisfaction is the same. So it's called an indifference curve because you're generally indifferent. Because why are you indifferent? Well, you're indifferent because you can give up one thing for another and still remain just as satisfied, right? So because remember, we are saying the combination of these two is going to be giving you an equal satisfaction, right? So hence you are indifferent between those combinations, right? So the combinations change as you move along there, but the satisfaction is just the same. So if you see, if you're on A, you are consuming more of X than Y. Then if you're on N, you are consuming more of Y than X. But the satisfaction is just the same, right? And then another characteristic of these indifference curves is that the one that's higher than, for instance, 2 is higher than 1. So 2 represents a higher level of satisfaction than 1. And then 3, of course, represents a higher level of satisfaction than 2. So we always assume that more is better than less, right? That's the assumption here. So this represents our consumption. But in a nation, there is consumption and production, right? So the part of production is what we've been talking about now. Your PPF curve basically speaks of your production. So your PPF curve gives you the boundary of what a nation can produce given its resources, given the availability of resources. So the PPF gives you that boundary there. So you can't consume, in terms of if you're in nation 1 and you're not trading, you can't consume on top of your PPF curve. Remember, it's called the PPF by the product possibility frontier, not a product possibility frontier curve. I'm saying it wrong, right? Or it's a PPC. You can't consume above there. Remember, one of the characteristics was that any points that lie above your PPF, though they are desirable, they are unattainable, right, with the given resources. And then the points that are in here are attainable, but they are not efficient. But the points that are on top there are not just attainable, but they are also efficient. So these are the points that are on this line here. So now when we talk of equilibrium in isolation, then we're looking for the point where your indifference curve and your PPF touch each other, right? So which is when they are tangent, where you can draw a line, a straight line there. So where they basically touch there. That's the point of equilibrium there. Why is it an equilibrium? Because that's the maximum that we can produce, right? Given the boundary of our PPF. And then here, given this boundary again, this is the maximum that we can consume, right? So remember, according to your indifference map, there are just a lot of these indifference curves that you can plot there. So an indifference curve that would be there is okay, but we are not efficient, right? It's not efficient because it's within there. There is room for improvement. So assuming that a nation is doing its best, then this is where you want to consume on point A there. All right. Then obviously, if you draw a line that's tangent, then this line is not just going to give you your marginal rate of substitution, but it's also going to give you your marginal rate of transformation, right? So your marginal rate of substitution obviously talks about the sacrifice in consumption, right? Where you are giving up some units of Y for X moving in that direction. Marginal rate of transformation talks about you giving up some units of Y in favor of X. So that ratio that you get basically represents the price, so which is the equilibrium price, right? Which is in autarky. So we're talking about the equilibrium price within the country. So which is the rate of substitution, right? Or to put it plain, it's gonna be the rate of exchange, right? So in other words, this dot here represents not just the point where a point that represents the amount of commodity Y that a consumer would want to give up to get an extra unit of X. But it also gives you the amount of commodity Y that producers would want to give up to produce an extra unit of X. So if you remember from the example where we're doing calculations, that basically gives us in general the opportunity cost. That would basically give us the opportunity cost, which is the value of one commodity in terms of the other, or what you are giving up, right, to get an extra unit of the other commodity, right? So in this instance, given that it's 0.25, right, it already shows you that this slope is flat, right? And then basically, it's a lot cheaper here to produce commodity X, right? because it's only going to cost you 0.5. So it's very cheap there. Sorry, 0.25. Then if you come down this side, it's actually going to cost you 4, right? So to get an extra unit of X here, you basically lose 4 units of Y. You basically need to lose 4 units of Y, or sacrifice 4 units of Y. So which means here it's a lot cheaper to produce Y than X. So this is basically what we're doing earlier. All right, then in terms of the gains of trade, what you gain in terms of trade. Now, this line here, as you are trading, if you remember from the previous examples that we're dealing with, we're talking about an equal exchange. Say, if Lesotho would exchange 600 tons of something for 600 tons of the other commodity, that ratio basically gives you a ratio of 1:1. So which is why you're seeing the price here given as 1, right? The price they're given as 1. So that would basically represent the international price, or the price with trade. It's 1. So in nation 1, think about this now. We were on A. Now we are able to consume on E, right? Now we are able to consume on E. Okay, sorry, I think I just got kicked out there, but we are finishing this up now. We are just gonna wrap this up. We're just gonna wrap this up in the next 2 minutes. Right. We are wrapping this up in the next 2 minutes. Okay, I'm just waiting for the network to come back on this machine here, on the stuff. But in the meantime, do we have any questions so far? I've got the network back now. I'm just going to share. So this is going to be a build up, of course, on what we'll be doing in terms of the HO theory. But as an illustration here, now you can see that we are consuming on a higher indifference curve, right? So which is why now the likes of Adam Smith were saying we gain from trade, right? So this represents part of the gains of trade, right? That you can now consume at a higher indifference curve, at a higher level of satisfaction. So this is where we are talking about you consuming commodities that you don't produce in your own country, as an example, right? Driving, using imported gadgets and what have you. So this is how it's graphically represented there. So that transition there from A to E shows us that. But there's a comprehensive graph here. Okay, maybe let me just show this before I go to the comprehensive graph there. When we talk of gains of exchange and then gains from specialization. So if you look at the movement there from A to T, right, in terms of consumption. So if you watch this out here, we are still dealing with the same straight line, right? We are still dealing with the same straight line, right? So if you look at okay, let me just read it out and then I'm gonna explain it, right? So the prevailing price is still that 1 there, right? So the increase in consumption from point A, which is that point there, which is that equilibrium in autarky, to point T represents the gains of exchange alone, right? That's the starting point, which is the gains of exchange alone. So in other words, those calculations that we're doing, they actually show what's being shown here, right? The gains of exchange alone. So we are now getting more. As you can see, we are producing a certain part of X, exchanging it for Y, right? So we are getting Y from nation 2. So you can see from this graph here that once we do that exchange, there's going to be a movement there, supposing maybe from 60 to 80 there, as a result of us exchanging our commodities. But then if nation one subsequently did specialize in the production of X, then and produced at point B, right? So which means as you're specializing, you're moving down, producing less of Y because you can get it from the other country. So that movement there reflects a specialization. Now you're doing less of Y and doing more of X, which is what you are good at. So now if you draw a straight line connecting that dot there, right, a line with the same gradient there of 1. So at that point E there, it will basically represent where you are going to be consuming at the end of the day. So that movement now from T to E is then going to represent your gains in specialization, right? Your gains from specialization. So it's not enough to exchange and specialize so that you are on a higher indifference curve. So you can see if you just exchange, you only get to indifference curve number 2. But if you exchange and specialize, you can even go to a higher indifference curve. So which means you are consuming more of X. And then why this one is higher is because you are consuming more of X because you are producing more of X. Then part of that X, you are exchanging it for more of Y. So hence, that's where you are on that point. So you realize that there it's still the same because you are getting as a result of exchange. But let's look at this in one diagram. Okay, I don't have it here in one diagram, but on the next session, we are going to see both diagrams in one, right? Where we basically have, where it shows your E there being equal to your E when we want to incorporate nation 2 there. All right.